You ever have one of those days where the spark just isn't there? Like you just can't be bothered, don't feel like you have the energy? For most of us, that feeling passes. But what if it didn't? What if that feeling just never went away? What if your motivation, your drive, your very personality just vanished?
Well, to get to the bottom of that, we're going to dive deep into the human brain. It's a fascinating and, yeah, sometimes an unsettling journey. And you'll see how the stories of a neurologist's patients can actually teach us about the very core of who we are.
So our journey kicks off with a real medical mystery. It's the story of a man whose spark just completely went out.
Before all this happened, David was, the textbook definition of motivated. He was a super outgoing financial consultant, always the guy taking charge, the absolute life of the party. His life was just full of purpose. Then, one day, in his 30s, he has what everyone thought was a minor stroke. And get this, he recovered physically in just a few days. He was walking, talking, totally fine. But the person his friends and family knew, he was just gone.
The change was just night and day. The job he used to love, totally boring to him now. His friends, the ones he used to be the life of the party with, he just seemed distant, totally disengaged. It was like he'd become a stranger, even to himself.
So when he got fired from his job, a huge life event, right? He felt absolutely nothing. He couldn't even summon the energy to fill out the forms for unemployment benefits. He told his doctor he just couldn't be arsed. And you gotta understand, this wasn't sadness, it wasn't depression, it was a complete and total void of motivation.
So what on earth happened to David? Was he just lazy all of a sudden? Depressed? Well, the answer, as it turns out, was biological. It was hidden deep, deep inside his brain.
And this is where Professor Masud Husain comes in. See, he's both a clinical neurologist and a neuroscientist, which means he was in the perfect position to connect the dots, to link David's really bizarre behavior to the cutting-edge science of the brain. Okay, so the very first step was getting the diagnosis right. David wasn't depressed, he was suffering from apathy, which is a very specific neurological condition. This is super important. It's not about feeling sad. It's about feeling, nothing. It's a total shutdown, an inability to get yourself to do anything.
David's doctor had actually tried antidepressants, but they did absolutely nothing. And that was a huge clue. It told them the problem wasn't some chemical imbalance messing with his mood. No, this was physical. It was actual structural damage to the brain's motivation circuits.
And what they found on his MRI scan was just, wow. It was startling. The scan showed two tiny, perfectly symmetrical holes deep inside his brain in a spot called the basal ganglia. It's incredible, really. These two super small strokes had acted like surgical strikes, taking out the exact network responsible for our drive, for our ability to make an effort.
And David's case proves this really powerful point that Professor Husain makes. What we so often just write off as a character flaw, laziness, can actually be biological. It can be physical. His apathy, it was never a choice.
So David's story is really a doorway to a much bigger, much more profound idea. That all the intricate stuff happening in our brains is what actually creates our sense of self.
It's no surprise that reviewers often compare Husain to the legendary Oliver Sacks. And it's for a really good reason. He has this amazing ability to blend compassionate human stories with hard science, making you see the real people, the real lives behind these incredible medical cases.
And listen, David's story, it's just the tip of the iceberg. The book is packed with these fascinating and, honestly, sometimes pretty frightening stories of how brain disorders can completely change who we are. We're talking about everything from losing the ability to speak to a woman who literally rewrites her own memories to someone whose social filter just disappears.
And all of this leads us to the book's core idea. Our self, the you that is you, isn't some single magical entity floating around in our heads. It's more like a team, a collection of all these different brain functions working together. Memory, perception, motivation, you name it. So when one of those functions gets damaged, you don't just lose a skill. You can lose a fundamental piece of your identity right along with it. Okay, so these changes happening inside the brain, they have huge consequences on the outside, in the real world. This is where the hard science of neurology bumps right up against the messy reality of our social lives. And Professor Husain draws a really important line here between two types of identity. On one hand, you've got your personal identity. That's your internal sense of who you are. But just as crucial is your social identity. That's all about where you fit in, how you belong to your family, your friends, your community.
And when a brain disorder hits, it can set off this devastating chain reaction. Step 1, something in the brain changes. Step 2, that change makes your behavior radically different. Step 3, suddenly you're breaking all these unwritten social rules you didn't even know existed. And the final step, a person who was once a total insider is now on the outside, totally disconnected, even from the people they love most. And what makes Husain's take on this so powerful is that he connects to it with this deep personal empathy. See, as a kid who immigrated to Britain, he knows exactly what it feels like to be treated as an outsider, to feel like you don't belong. And that experience gives him this incredible insight into the social isolation his patients are going through.
So, when you take David's story and all these other big ideas, it really forces us to face one of the biggest questions there is. What are we? Who are we really?
And this question, it just ignites this huge debate, one that gets right at the heart of free will. So, from the neuroscientist's point of view, the self is basically something that emerges from the brain's machinery. The brain creates the self. And the implication of that, it's staggering. It suggests our choices, our personalities, are all products of biology. But then you have this compelling counterargument from philosophers. They say, hold on, a healthy brain is necessary, sure, it's the tool, but it doesn't create the self. In that view, you are way more than just a bunch of neurons firing.
And that leaves us with a final, and honestly, a pretty haunting question. If your entire personality, your drive, even your ability to love and connect, can be wiped out by something as tiny as a few damaged cells, what does that say about who we are? It forces you to ask, where does the real you actually exist?